Hey everyone, it's Christopher, Mono County Library Director and co-host of the Oxygen Starved podcast. I'm back with Book Talk Friday, meaning I'm back with two great reads you can check out from the library, one old and one new. Let's start with the new. You know, it's hard to believe it's been 20 years this summer since the first Joe Pickett novel from C.J. Box, Open Season. Well, he is now back this spring with his 21st Joe Pickett novel, Dark Sky. Joe Pickett is a game warden, and the New York Times Review describes Joe as an unlikely hero, a decent man who lives paycheck to paycheck, and who is deeply fond of his wife and his three daughters. Pickett isn't especially remarkable except for his honesty and for a quality that Harold Bloom attributes to Shakespeare, the ability to think through everything for himself. Those are the Times' words, and C.J. Box adds that over more than 20 novels, Joe's taken on environmental terrorists, rogue federal land managers, animal mutilators, crazed cowboy hitmen, corrupt bureaucrats, homicidal animal rights advocates, and violent dysfunctional families. Well, Joe has matured, lost some of his innocence and naivete, and committed acts that continue to haunt him. But through it all, he has remained true to himself and his family. And even when he knows that pursuing justice will bring the community, state, and his superiors down on his head, well, he just can't help it. Those are C.J. Box's words. Now let me read a little bit of the blurb for Dark Sky so you get an idea of where Joe finds himself this time. When the governor of Wyoming gives Joe Pickett the thankless task of taking a tech baron on an elk hunting trip, Joe reluctantly treks into the wilderness with his high-profile charge. But as they venture into the woods, a manhunter is hot on their heels, driven by a desire for revenge. Finding himself without a weapon, a horse, or a way to communicate, Joe must rely on his wits and his knowledge of the outdoors to protect himself and his companion. Now, like the other Pickett novels, this one is eminently readable, and it's getting great reviews. One review states, this latest Pickett outing is one of his very best. As always, the vast Wyoming wilderness is conjured in vivid, spare prose, and Box also brilliantly situates his narrative in our post-pandemic world. A couple of matter-of-fact asides about mask-wearing dropped in to emphasize that Pickett inhabits the same reality as the rest of us, but without ever belaboring the point. This is C.J. Box's Dark Sky. Now, Joe Pickett is a game warden. Do you know when the first game warden in the country was appointed? Well, it was long before white settlers came west to Wyoming. It was in 1739 in the state of Massachusetts, which brings me to the old Wildlife in America by Peter Matheson. Now, Matheson died in 2014 and is most known for his two National Book Award winners, Snow Leopard and Shadow Country, as well as his play that was turned into a movie, At Play in the Fields of the Lord. But as a young man fresh out of the Navy and college, he was a co-founder of the Paris Review, a literary journal that's still going strong, and which he referred to as his cover job while he also worked for the CIA in the 1950s. Now, as I mentioned, he was a writer of fiction and nonfiction and a playwright, and Wildlife in America first came out in 1959, just a few years before Rachel Carson's A Silent Spring. This is a conservationist history of wildlife that North America has had and lost over time, and thus a cautionary book that helped influence the growing conservationist movement. Today, you would not read it as a current expose on the state of endangered or extinct wildlife because obviously so much has happened since 1959. But you would read it as one of the first influential classics of this genre aimed at mainstream American readers. Remember, the 1950s and 60s was an era when Americans were recreating on the landscape far more than ever before as new highways and campgrounds made it easier to get to state and national parks, when many households were subscribing to the National Geographic magazine and creating their own home collections, when television was sending nature programs made by the likes of Walt Disney to Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom directly into people's homes. What Wildlife in America did wasn't so much to chastise the way we'd driven so many species to the brink of extinction, as much as illustrate that human actions have consequences, often unanticipated. And if we wanted our children and their children to appreciate American wildlife, we needed to learn from those actions to make more informed decisions going forward. Case in point, the western gray wolf. It was ubiquitous in the American West in the 19th century, where it feasted on bison. But when bison was hunted and disappeared from the landscape, the gray wolf turned to the next best thing it could find, the cattle and the sheep that were taking over the bison's grazing habitats. That's when the ranchers and the U.S. government took on the gray wolf, and a population of about 2 million was hunted to near extinction. That was the state of affairs when Wildlife in America was first published. It wasn't until the gray wolf was put under protection of an early version of the Endangered Species Act in the 1960s that its numbers began to rebound, and today it has been reintroduced into the American West and is spreading across multiple states. Now, wildlife in America covers all sorts of species, fish, birds, mammals, coming from the land, the lakes, the rivers, and the oceans around us. It also has this fascinating historical timeline that shows conservation efforts are not new. Massachusetts had prohibited camouflaged canoes and bird hunting as early as 1710, and deer seasons were first set up in 1776 as the first federal game law. And today, when we think about the wildlife around us in the Eastern Sierra and how we can make sure that it's there for our children and their children to appreciate, such as preserving the areas for sage grouse to mate, for ways to mitigate vehicles hitting mule deer on 395 as they migrate to and from the mountains, we have early works like Wildlife in America to thank for opening our eyes and helping us understand which actions can have beneficial consequences to both wildlife and humans alike. This is Wildlife in America by Peter Matheson. This is CJ Box's latest, Dark Sky. Both are great books available from Mono County Library. All 7 of our locations are open. We encourage you to come in and grab one of these or some other great book to read. In the meantime, stay safe and happy reading.